We are changing companies to save money.
Do they have is there water in the vending machine outside?
I don't know what's in the vending machine.
There is no water available in City Hall.
There are delicious water fountains right
We
outside the
scheduled
doors
this meeting.
with
Do you have a cup?
superb water. I do not have a cup.
Well, then don't tell me.
I will loan you my water bottle.
Get up there, keep going out there and take a drink, you're gonna think I've lost my mind.
That's how good the water is. It's worth the trip for every drink.
I shower in it every day, Chris, I love it. You're putting together a fabulous product. Is the agenda in these blue folders as well?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I think we're just 15 seconds. Are you ready, Mr. Walter?
I am. Go right ahead.
All right. I'd ask everybody in the, hang on. Welcome, everybody. I'd like everybody to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, thank you very much. I did receive notification via text that Mr. Lee will not be able to make it tonight. He is running late, so we may see him at some point, but he definitely won't be here for the beginning. However, I would ask Kathy for the roll call.
Hickman,
Here,
Lee, Walter,
Here.
2 out of 3, still is a quorum. So thank you very much, Mr. Wall, for being out. I know we don't have a ton of items on here, but we only have a half hour, so I would say let's get ready to go. And Chris, as I look here, we've got utility construction specifications as the first item.
That is correct. We have, we've gone through and reviewed the existing utility construction specs that the department uses. Have made some changes to update them to more reflect what we actually want to happen out in the field. A lot of these changes, the document's 107 pages, so what I put in the packet is only the pages that have changes on them. Most of them are relatively trivial, things like getting rid of copper service lines because we only allow plastics and making the language reflect that. Installing tracer wire on those plastic lines, rapid seal all the manhole joints, which this is stuff that we go over in the pre-cons with the construction crews. These are things that we make them do anyway. We're just trying to make the language reflect that.
Chris, ultimately, you're looking for a utility committee to pass a recommendation on to council. What would you see this as being? Would you see it as being on the next council?
Yeah, if everything goes through and the recommendation comes from the committee, I would have it ready as a resolution for the November 4th meeting.
One of the things that, in looking at those, some of the things I might have a question about, but I really don't have any expertise about whether or not the steps leading down in the manhole should be vinyl versus aluminum or whatever those things were.
Right.
We spoke today very briefly about, can you give me an idea of maybe 3 of the big changes or the significant ones, and then maybe have Andy and I have an opportunity to ask questions about other stuff? If he doesn't
Sure.
hit 'em?
Yeah, that's no problem. So there's 4 significant changes that are in these pages. The first one is on page number 13, which is the second page in that little packet. In paragraph 209, we added language in here to where any manhole that a force main from a lift station dumps into, the manhole and 2 manholes downstream will have to be epoxy coated on the inside to prevent from hydrogen sulfide eating up the manholes. That's not something that we've done in the past. It is something that we discussed and frankly liked when we were discussing the scenic view estates process. And so we wanted to add that into the language. That was a big change. Another big change is on page 42, paragraph F. The language that we had in the past, anytime someone installed a lift station, they were only required to have a generator receptacle where we could take our portable generator up to the station if it lost power. The problem with that is we only have one, and you have to come in and get it and take it out to the station. So I'd like to change the language to require an actual generator as opposed to just a receptacle for it. So that was a big change in there.
Can we stop right there real quick?
Yes.
Is that at each individual, did you say station?
At lift station, yes. Yes,
So part of, if they're gonna install a lift station, they're gonna also purchase a dedicated generator.
correct. And it'll be a standby generator that can operate all the capabilities of the station if the power was to fail.
And natural gas, because,
Natural gas is great because you don't have to fill it up and it's just ready to run. If there was a site that was remote, we could do diesel. That's what we have on some of our other sites now.
okay,
The third thing I had is on page number 50. Again, these are excerpts, so it's not 50 pages in, but the lift station communications chapter, what we had in the past is a thing called a sensophone, which basically a float goes off. This robot, for lack of a better term, calls the person on call and says there's an alarm. It's real limited on what information it can give you and is not integrated into our SCADA system. So what we don't use a sensophone system anymore, we use a radio system. And so that language was just changed to reflect that we would want any lift station that was to put in the future, we would want a radio unit that could communicate with our existing SCADA system as opposed to the old style sensophone. And then the last large thing I could think of is back in the drawing sections, page W24. That is a sketch for water meter pits for smaller meters, for residential units. And the city has a meter pit spec sheet that we use, a specific style of meter pit that we get from either Core Maine or Ferguson, or two local communities that have them. So we just redid this page to match the specs that we are already using. Those specs are on our website. Contractors have been using them for a while. This is just to update the spec documents to reflect what we're actually putting in out there. Outside of that, it's a lot of small adjustments, basically, just to try and make the documents as accurate as possible in what we actually want.
I appreciate that. I think, for me, it's somewhat like reading stereo instructions, and I appreciate you sending it out ahead of time. As I was looking through it though, in all honesty, I was like, wow, I don't even know if, so I appreciate you coming up with those. Mr. Walther, any specific questions that you
Yeah,
have?
just a couple quick questions. Reading through this just really quickly on your backflow materials.
Yes.
I noticed you're not allowing sand anymore, but are you allowing any kind of recycled material?
So on all backfill materials, all we ever allow is 57s. So we haven't around within a foot of the pipe. Once you
Okay,
get
so
above the foot of the
you
pipe.
can have
then-
recycled 57s, you can
Yes,
have recycled
absolutely.
304. Recycled just means it's crushed concrete. It's gone through
As long as,
crushing.
right, then that would be fine. As long as it met the 57 specs, it would be.
And whose specs are you saying they're gonna meet Columbus specifications, or are you gonna meet, whose gradation specifications are you meeting?
So I don't really know how to answer that. The only,
So typically if I'm working in other municipalities, they always refer back to a Columbus spec. It's
that
written
is
pretty
very
well.
common with us as well.
Yeah, so Columbus gradation works very well. Your crushing plants will go through and get those tested for that, and they can have it's a real quick certification essentially.
I understand what you're saying, and I believe, again, not having the full document here, there are multiple places where it references Columbus specs for things that we're doing.
Okay.
So that would be where they would go.
On your manhole extensions, and I'm back here on page sanitary 3, standard drawing, sanitary 4, standard drawing.
Yes.
Your alternate tops and different things. Do you guys ever see using your precast? You're talking about grade rings, but are you using any kind of PVC grade rings on that? Are those acceptable to use?
No, we have not used those, and I would not prefer to use a PVC. I would like to cast just for endurance.
Okay. I've just seen Columbus has gone to them,
Have they?
and some other
So
municipalities
I've not
have
had
gone
any
to 'em.
experience with a plastic.
Yeah, I think the nice thing about it is they come in a little bit more grades, so you can get a half inch. You can get instead of going the
Right,
typical 4,
the
6,
typical
12.
increments,
That
right.
was it, and you better make your grade work to that. They come in a lot more variables.
So that's something, I'll definitely do some research on. I think everything in here could be as approved by the director down the road, but I have no experience on that, but I'll definitely do some research on that. If it's gonna be just as good, there's no reason not to accept it,
They're proving to be just as good.
especially if it gives you more flexibility like
It gives
that.
you a lot.
Yeah.
biggest thing with that is your infiltration, and you don't want a big hump by the manhole.
Right.
And you don't want it to be
Don't want it to be-
recessed either.
Right, I don't want it to be the catch basin of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So that brings me to a good question, which is, obviously sand's not allowed anymore, maybe there's something else, maybe this example is good. On the fly, is there a catch language in here that allows the director to approve in certain instances?
Yes, every spec is laid out and it'll say or equivalent as approved by the director.
So it gives you a chance
So
to
everything can
test
be-
Andy's
Yes,
thing.
yes, absolutely.
Okay, I'm sorry I jumped in there, Andy, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Those are just a couple of the first ones I saw. You know, your below ground meter pits, you know, the drainage spec for those. I'm just trying to look for that. I didn't see anything with that.
So-
Obviously, you don't want your meter pits filling up with water.
No, we don't. So currently, right now, we don't have any. What we found is that when we lay gravel over the service line and make a drainage, it almost turns into a French drain, bringing the water
Bringing water
into
back.
the meter pit.
So-
It's kind of a
So Columbus has gone to all above ground and hot boxes. So, which is a pain, which is just terrible. They look horrible. They're terrible to maintain. But as long as you can get positive drainage to your storm drains, I don't see any reason why you can't have a below ground meter pit
right.
set up, as long as you have the drainage to it. So what do you do typically now? You don't have any drain whatsoever?
No, we don't. We put gravel in the base of the meter pit, and that's really it. So we deal with the groundwater that makes its way in there, but we found that when we had the gravel drain, it was collecting more than it was actually pulling away. So once you dig down to the bottom, I mean, the trench is pretty flat for a water line, and it just kind of
Yeah.
doesn't go anywhere.
Okay, I look forward to reading it.
It's very exciting reading.
Yeah.
So, do you want to read this more?
What's that?
Do you wanna read this more, or do you think that this now is in a position where we can make a recommendation to council that this move forward?
What, if we have, is there any urgency to get this through?
So
right
there's
now?
not really, these are all things that like I said, when we have our pre-cons, we're doing these anyway, so we can continue to do that while we fine tune everything. So
You-
we could wait if we're not gonna be ready by the November 4th
Do
meeting.
you have language in there, it's per direction of the director at this point? Do you have anything in there that says that now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I'm kinda comfortable to look at it, quite frankly.
Okay. I mean, so let's do this, we'll approve this at the next utility committee meeting. Because if we're waiting for the utility committee to make a recommendation to council, ultimately, I think that once it makes the docket for council, even though it does read like stereo instructions, I'd like council to be sent a copy of this so that they can at least look at it and know what we're talking about.
Would the utility committee prefer to have the full 107-page document as, with the changes in there? I mean, it gets tricky doing the red line thing with the pictures. At the end.
I'll speak for myself, no. But everybody's different. Andy
I don't think
enjoys a
it's
certain
necessary.
different
Yeah.
level of masochism than I do.
I don't think it's necessary, I think just what you're planning on changing.
That works.
Yeah, like that's good. All right, does that move us on?
Yes, sir. That's all I had on construction specs. The next thing I had is it's just one page in there. We got the language back from the EPA on the permit. Almost everything in our permit was very similar to the years past. They changed the frequency of a sample you have to get here and there, but nothing really substantial. The I&I section, of course, is what we know. That was completely new and added, and that is what this sheet is. There's 2 pages. This is the language that they basically accepted from our negotiation back and forth. If you'll remember, the original language was very restrictive. It was going to be difficult to do, had a very tight time frame on it. Basically now, the language we have now is 15 months from November 1st. We need to have a plan developed for the I&I program. 9 months after that, we need to have a schedule filled out. So 24 months, we need to have a plan and a schedule on what actions we're going to take to reduce the I&I program. There is no minimum amount of projects that has to be done. There's no minimum amount of I&I that has to be taken out. It just has to be efforts taken to reduce it. So it actually, the language that came back is relatively vague and gives us a good amount of flexibility for budget and time constraints and things like that.
I guess I would say, kudos to you for jumping on it, because if somebody who would happen to be a director for some reason suddenly got that and just said, oh, okay, I guess we have to do this, man, they'd be under the gun to seriously go through some major I&I changes in a short period of time. So I think this is a good update. Any other questions, Mr. Walter?
I don't think so. I think it seems pretty straightforward from the EPA.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that, we don't need anything, you don't need any council action on that, do you?
No, it's just to keep everybody up to date. So we're still going through the RFQ selection process that we started way back when. We're on our second firm, and we're basically waiting for this language to come back so that we know what we're required to do. Anticipate having a scope and a price by the end of this month to evaluate.
So the first company in that RFQ has been eliminated,
Correct.
correct?
Yes, could not come to an agreement on price.
We're now on to the second company.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So that's all I had for the I&I. The last item was the Scenic View Estates sanitary system. So what you'll have is two pieces of paper are stapled together. The first page is the letter that lists the 11 concerns that were discussed in the utility committee meeting for Scenic View Sanitary. The second page is language that Mr. Fulton and I drafted up and sent to Mr. Zetz for review. I've got a red number next to each paragraph just to kind of tell you which one of the 11 issues is addressed in those paragraphs. Some of the topics were similar, so we condensed them into paragraphs with each other. But this language is what would be plastered over all of the construction plans, the HOA agreement, everything, if it is acceptable to utility committee. If it is, the plan would be to contact the developer this week and try and set up a meeting with Mr. Fulton, myself, and them to review this language. But in concept, they've already seen the list of concerns, and they have been very flexible and accepting of those concerns. So, the one thing I did want to point out that was different from what you've seen before is why you have this little folded up map in the back. The blue area shows the large wetland that they've come across. That's category 3. And so the 6 green lots that are highlighted, it would be impossible. It would be extremely difficult to get gravity sewer around those wetlands and into the rest of the gravity sewer. So we're requesting that those 6 lots be allowed to also tie on to the force main system. Not for any other reason than the inaccessibility through the wetland. The rest of the lots would, in the bottom third, 1 through 19, would be gravity sewer, or 1 through 17, excuse me, would be gravity sewer, with the exception of those 6 because of the wetland. So that was just an informational update. It's different than what the utility committee last saw.
Again, I have not been out there. I haven't looked at the wetland. Did either of you perchance have an opportunity to say, yeah, they'd have to build a bridge or something crazy? What's the lowdown on that?
That is something that they would have to do. So you can see that all of the lots, their driveways all come right through that wetland, and it is substantial enough that they are going to have to build a bridge to span that wetland just for driveway access. So it is a obstacle in their construction that they're going to have to deal with, not just for sewer, but also for access to get through those wetlands.
Any questions about the map, Mr. Walton?
Nope, I understand.
And then, who double checked the concerns of the utility committee versus the paragraphs in the letter? Was that you two together, or you two and Brian, or?
Me and Mr. Fulton worked on them together, and then we sent them off to Brian for review, for legal language review, and he's done that as well. So this, to this point, is the final draft of the language.
So, in keeping with what we would move forward now, this would go back to planning and zoning, is that correct?
Yes.
That is correct. Our next step for us would, if this is okay, we would meet with the developer to go over it with them, and their next stop would be back to planning commission to revise the plan that is in front of council now. And it would include all this language on HOA documents, their development text, engineering plans, the preliminary plan, everything would have this language on it, so it's very clear what's happening.
And the item that's sitting now tabled would remain on the table until that got back through planning and zoning, came to us, then it would be a change by substitution, so it would have to be heard in fourth reading.
That's correct.
Mr. Walter, any input on that part, or do you?
So I just wanted to understand your construction of a future sanitary. It seems to me that we're just gonna use let's just use a 20-foot deep sanitary. So they would have an extra 10 feet, so they'd have the 20-foot easement, right, the first easement, plus, let's say the sanitary's a foot, so we'll just say 21. Is it an additional 10 feet that they get, because it's a 1-to-1 ratio, to making it a total of a 30-foot or 30-foot easement? Is that what, is that?
Yes,
Read
so-
number, this is number, the second paragraph.
Yes, the 1-to-1 depth to width would be for that scenario, where you have an extremely deep sewer. If we're gonna open cut that, we're gonna need an extremely wide easement to accommodate that.
So, but for construction purposes, are we, typically that's not enough room to construct. It's enough room to maintain, but it's not enough room to construct. Is there any thought involved in a temporary construction easement? Well, first, two things. One, do we have a route designated for this permanent sewer, in the future permanent sewer if necessary?
Yes, that's gonna be included in the engineer drawings, yes.
And then secondary, we don't know how deep that is, because we're not gonna go bother to engineer it at this point. Do you feel comfortable that you're gonna have enough room to construct, because the city's responsibility to do so?
True.
And to go buy easements after this, because it's already going to be contentious. When we go and tell
It
them they're
definitely will
going to
be at that
pay,
point.
gonna pay for it, and we're putting it in, and they gotta lose their sanitary, force main if there are issues. How are you gonna get temporary easement? Do you feel it's necessary to put language in there for a temporary construction easement that will be at your discretion, not theirs?
I think that makes perfect sense. It's not something that I even thought of, to be honest with you. So I think we can go back and add that to the language for temporary construction, because you're right, it will be contentious if that was to ever happen, and it'd be a lot.
It'll be
The whole-
contentious.
The whole point of having this laid out now is to avoid situations like that.
Absolutely.
So we'll definitely go back and add that into the language.
I
So
like
what-
other comments would be, I like the tree regulation, the 20 foot outside of the building perimeter. That was good, you know, that's the whole point of doing this. The maintenance of the force main there, and again, I just glanced over this, so it may be in here, but you know where I'm going with this, how the maintenance of the force main, you know, typically we have with a traditional sanitary, you start at the lateral and back is the owners. Do we have a designated point where that's their maintenance and what's our maintenance?
Yes, we do. It's the same concept where the lateral feeding up to the public
Is it the
force main.
backflow preventer? What is it?
There is. So there's a valve and a check device, and all of that. So it'd be from the valve over is all private to the house, and then just the collective force main is what is public infrastructure.
How do they, okay, so I guess the question I was coming to is if they have to go service their force main, their
Their
private
force lateral, right.
how do they turn off? How do they disconnect from the force main that's happening out there in the street or wherever this is gonna be laid? How do they turn that off to actually deal with their force main portion, their grinder pump? Because behind the valve, it's under pressure.
Correct. So they would have a valve where that lateral connects to the force main, and you would shut it off there, and then from there back to the house.
So is that our valve or is that
The
their
valve is fixed. The valve is private, so it would be from the public side of that valve. That stub of pipe from the public side of the valve to the force main would be ours. Basically, the connection, and everything from the valve to the house would all be private.
similar to a curb stop.
Yes,
Because
very simple.
You know, when you're,
Same concept, yes.
Yeah.
The difference being the curb stop is ours, in this situation, the valve would.
that's where I'm kind of thinking, why would we want to keep the valve as ours? I'm just asking the question.
I don't think it would be a burden either way. I guess the 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Okay.
It's one more thing to fail, but it does offer more control on the city side, so I can see both sides. I'm not too worried about it, to be honest with you. I kind of, because this isn't a clean water valve, I would rather anything that's not just a pipe be
Theirs.
left to the private side in this system.
What I'm getting to is, okay, so, you know, lot owner, whatever, let's just say 10, has to replace his valve, that
Right.
valve. Do we have to shut down the force main to let him do that?
So
Yes.
we would. There is a.
Because it's under pressure. You'd
Doesn't-
have a bunch of
doesn't
stuff,
he shut it
you'd
off
have a
at
bunch
his
of
valve?
stuff over everybody if you didn't.
So it would be.
Then doesn't he shut it off at his valve, at the
That's-
main?
If that
If you had a
valve
double
failed-
valve system, you could, but what I'm getting at is,
Right, if the valve closest to the main was the problem, then he would have no way of, like Andy said, of stopping product from coming back on him while he's trying to fix that valve.
That's not
So
product,
anybody
yeah.
upstream of him,
Raw product.
it'd be a
Would
really
have
hard
to be-
situation.
yeah, okay. So what we do have is, which is a slight change from before, and I've neglected to bring it up. We were requiring a 3-inch minimum diameter for the force main. That cuts down the scouring velocity of the flow. So what we've done is every 1,000 feet, there will be a 3-inch cam fitting in a almost meter pit style box that we can come in and connect hoses to
So you
for
can take- so you can
flushing
bypass.
and bypass, yes.
Okay,
So
that's
we
fine.
could get around, so there may be a couple that are in that bypass section, but you could get around it while
Yep.
they're,
Okay.
while they're being maintenance.
Got
Uh,
it. Good.
Feel comfortable enough to send it,
Yeah, I think they've addressed,
I think so
have
too.
full
And
confidence
actually,
you
this
guys
is
have
kind of,
addressed
this has kind of worked exactly how, I guess. I've been pretty, I'm happy that the developers are okay with it. I'm happy that it ended up being all right. Scott, what do you need council to send that, approve that language, or just the utility committee?
Just the utility committee.
With that said, I'll entertain a motion to approve this.
I'm gonna make a motion to approve the scenic view state sewer system language for the utility commission, or that addresses the utility committee's concerns.
And I'll second that motion, and Kathy, I'll ask for a roll call.
Hickman,
Yes?
Walter.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Well, you'll amend that.
Which is temporary, yes, sir. Yep.
As amended.
Right.
As amended. And then, you guys will keep us up to date, I mean, maybe just the utility committee for now, I'll make sure I brief council on this tonight, but, keep us up to date on the next step, which is discussing that stuff with the developers. I know you've been in contact with them, and I know they've been in contact with you, because they're chomping at the bit too. But with that said, just in case something goes sideways, or whatever.
Absolutely.
Will do.
All right, anything else, Chris?
No, sir, I do not have
Mr.
anything.
Walter, do you have an item?
I do. Chris, just a quick question. Looking through the budget, the proposed budget for 2020, and looking at the budget balances for the next 5 years, I noticed that the utilities, both water and sewer, are both declining. And I was under the impression that we had gone through this in a pretty meticulous way with the rate increases. Anything that we can talk about that, you know, obviously we can talk about it through the budget concerns, but is there something that we may have not included in our analysis with the increases by chance?
So nothing that I can think of off the top of my head. There are a large amount of capital improvement projects that are out there that, as we can't fund them, continue to get pushed down the line.
I saw
because of that.
2024 seems like a
Because
pretty
of
big year.
20 right, and as a result of that,
That's where it's all been accumulated.
we go out 5 years, and so that's where it lands. But the operational side,
The concern I have was it's a year-to-year decline, and I thought we were addressing that so that we either had a flat line or an increasing slope on our budget. But anyhow, I just
Right.
wanted to ask that question. Which anything, I'm sure we can talk about it at council too.
Yeah, we'll be, with that question, we'll be prepared to talk about it at council. Appreciate it.
Thanks, that's all I have.
With that said, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Hickman,
Yes?
Walter.
Yes.
Don't go anywhere, folks, we got 1 minute. We're here for the fun.